Okay, we're just about to get started. First and foremost, welcome to our webinar focused on understanding ERISA and the DOL requirements. Thank you for joining us today, and we do hope that you find this webinar insightful. I would like to note that all attendees are on mute, but should you have any questions throughout the presentation, you can submit them in your control panel under the questions field. However, any questions submitted will be addressed in the follow-up email, just so that we stay within the 30-minute time frame. So without further ado, I am pleased to present Senior Consultant Bill Karsten, along with Senior Investment Analyst Tom Loftus. Gentlemen.
Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. This is Bill Karsten. And the first topic I want to address today is I recognize we have some who are joining us today who are overseeing non-ERISA plans. And so I want to point out that years back, the IRS did issue guidance that states following ERISA guidance does not subject your plan to ERISA rules. So stated another way, everything that we're going to speak about today. My apologies. Hopefully the sound is better. I understand we're having a little technical difficulty there. I was just giving assurance that following ERISA guidance, for those of you who oversee non-ERISA plans, rest assured that that does not subject your plan to being considered an ERISA plan. The IRS issued guidance on that, so everything we're talking about today can certainly be applied to non-ERISA plans the way it can be applied to ERISA plans. And so on this first slide here that we go through, I'll just go to the bottom. The key point, and many of you have heard it again and again, it's process and documentation are very critical, and we'll speak more to that as we go through the presentation today. The other thing, just so I don't forget, I want to note this is the first of an 8-part series. So, about once every few weeks, we'll have another session focused on an additional topic. It will be myself and Tom Loftus leading those discussions. So this is just laying the foundation for that series and more to come. So key fiduciary concepts. First and foremost, the exclusive benefit rule. What does that really mean for investment selection and monitoring for your plan? When you're selecting your investment structure and the funds to go in your plan, you always want to keep in mind the best interest of your entire plan population. Now, that doesn't mean every investment option that you offer is in every single participant's best interest, but certainly you want to avoid expanding the menu just to satisfy a person or two, recognizing that if you added too many funds to the lineup, that could be detrimental to the decision process for many other participants. So always keep in mind what's in the best interest of your plan participants as a whole. The prudent person rule is, this goes back to 1974 with ERISA and really holds you to a standard of an expert. And that's why you would hire record keeper, an auditor, ERISA or legal counsel, as well as a consultant for your plan, because everyone who's on the phone today, you obviously have 100 other responsibilities, and so you're really not in a position to be an expert in all things relevant to your retirement plan. So again, these are two core concepts just to always keep in mind in the oversight of your plan. So more specific to investments. ERISA calls for you to diversify plan assets, which really sounds more like pension plan language. As it relates to defined contribution plans, your focus is really on what investment funds that you make available to your plan participants, and that's where your responsibility lies. Interestingly, there has not been an update to this 46-year-old ERISA guidance, and today still the requirement is that you offer at least 3 different investment options, each of which must be diversified, as you see here, and have different risk and return characteristics. Technically, you could meet the requirement with a diversified money market fund, bond fund, and a stock fund, but participants would likely not be too happy with that being a limited selection. More realistically, you want to offer a more expansive menu, but you also, in today's environment, you want to be offering fully diversified investment options, which would be your target date fund offerings within the plan. And so going to that second bullet point here, ERISA has issued guidance back in 2013 specific to defaulting participants. So many of you may have a plan structured in a way where participants could receive an employer contribution without having signed up on their own. And so you could be in a position where participants are defaulted into the plan, and ERISA guidance recommends that you would invest them in a fully diversified fund, which for many of you, that would be target date funds that you offer on your menu. So this speaks a little bit to the documentation that gives you additional fiduciary protection. But the other thing to note is that you want to make sure that you have processes in place and documentation supporting your decision processes relative to your target date fund selections, and that there is that ongoing monitoring that is being done of those funds. So moving forward, additional key concepts, as we discussed, ERISA is more concerned with the quality of the process that is followed by plan fiduciaries. And turning it over to Mr. Loftus here, he'll speak a little bit to investment decisions only being judged based on information that is available at the time of the decision.
Thank you, Bill. And as Bill mentioned, and as we've got noted here right in the center of the slide, the investment decisions related to your plan are only judged based on the information that was available at the time the decision was made. And there's a 6-year statute of limitations relative to those plan decisions. But more importantly, that is not where the decision process stops. And so as a fiduciary, you do maintain responsibility to monitor previous investment decisions that you've made and regularly reaffirm or take a different stance on decisions that were made based on new information that's been made available. Say, for example, an investment that you've elected to add to your plan suddenly has a major shift in leadership, a new manager takes over, or there's an explicit change in the strategy that fund follows. At that point, does that information, that new information, align and help you make the same decision that you would have made knowing that change was looming at the time of the decision, or is it worth reassessing? At the same time, and this is another area where we like to provide some clarity, when you think about reassessing previous decisions, it's not solely focused on the decision that you made with regard to the actual investments that are now a part of your retirement program. When you're looking retroactively at decisions, you need to take into consideration what else is available now and be more proactive with that approach. If you elected investment XYZ 2 years ago and fund XYZ is in a category that has since doubled in size, there may be a whole new universe of other candidate investment options that could and should be evaluated in line with your existing investment option to determine whether that is in fact still the best choice for your plan participants. Similarly with fees, new share classes of investment options are coming out all the time, so a periodic reassessment of whether the pricing structure of your investment menu is still appropriate and is providing participants with the lowest cost structure possible is very necessary. At the same time, too, whether or not new share classes or new fund structures are available, the plan demographics and logistics may have changed. Your retirement plan may have crossed a threshold that now provides you with access to a lower cost structure for your investment and investment fees. And those are things that do need to be reevaluated as well in light of new information. The next slide we've got up on the screen here, I think it's a good one that touches back to some earlier points that Bill was making and provides some considerations for you as the plan sponsor around designing an effective ERISA compliant investment menu. And unfortunately, it's not as simple as saying we've got 3 diversified funds in our menu and everything that we add beyond that is only protecting us more as a fiduciary. On the left side of the screen, very obviously, you run into issues if you have too few options available to your participants. If they, in fact, cannot appropriately diversify their portfolios, you run into an issue if participants feel that they do not have enough choice, the notion alone that the plan is not adequate to support their investment needs can be problematic. And similarly, with a more limited investment structure, you may have some serious holes in what you're making available to participants that can be an impediment for ideal participant outcomes long term. The flip side of that, having too many investment options. So adding funds for the sake of diversifying makes sense to a certain degree, but we stress here that a plan should always be focused on balancing simplicity with adequacy. The more investment options that you add to the plan, the more investment decisions that plan participants have to make. And if there are too many choices, participants are going to be confused, and human nature is going to predispose those participants to step away from making those difficult decisions. At the same time, the more investment options you have in the plan provides more fiduciary oversight responsibility for those investments. Another point to hit home as well, under that fiduciary mindset, whether or not you as the plan sponsor has a good grasp of your investment structure and know with some documentation that you're providing participants with a well-diversified array of investments. If participants don't understand the nuances of those investments and the right education is not in place to help them make the right decisions, things like investment overlap can be very problematic. So you've got 2 funds that both fall into the same Morningstar category. And as a plan sponsor, you've done the due diligence, you've proven out the fact that there are benefits to offering both because maybe they offer very distinct investment strategies. But when a participant goes in to elect their investments, they see a Morningstar category that is the same for 2 investments. They're predisposed to choose whichever of those 2 has performed the best. And a challenge as a fiduciary is very transparently articulating why 2 investment options when they're both in the same category, and objectively one must be the better performer. So very involved decision making. It goes beyond the fact that diversification is key. It's maintaining balance and putting some critical thought as a fiduciary into structuring a plan's investment structure.
Thank you, Tom. So a little bit more on investment oversight considerations. So, we've talked a lot today about striking a balance, and I'll expand on that in 2 ways. One, we noted the ERISA hurdle for meeting the minimum requirement. Obviously, if you only offered a money market fund, a bond fund, and a stock fund, that would minimize your fiduciary risk in terms of the number of funds that you have to oversee. But you wouldn't necessarily have happy participants, and it wouldn't be a menu that would serve your participants well, especially those that we would classify as the do-it-for-me participants who really flock to the target date fund offerings. So, recognizing you want to strike that balance there, we first and foremost offering that fully diversified solution brings that highest level of simplicity to the plan. But looking at the investment menu in terms of the individual fund options that you would offer, speaking to your money market fund, your stable value, bond funds, stock funds, and so forth, you want to be careful to balance out diversification versus not overwhelming your participants. And what we found typically for a defined contribution plan, somewhere in that range of 15 to 20 investment options can really be a good balance point in terms of covering key categories that do offer significant diversification benefit, as well as offering some actively managed funds versus index to give those choices to participants, recognizing there are a lot of index investors out there and they're looking for those funds to be on your menu. That is what we really see to be that optimal balance where participants will be satisfied with the choices that you've offered up to them, while at the same time not running the risk of overwhelming them. And again, recognizing you're looking to, within a reasonable range, minimize fiduciary risk. Again, you have to expand that menu to a point that it satisfies the bulk of your participants, but at the same time doesn't put you in a position of a higher risk level than where you want to be at. So speaking of the selection and monitoring, we talked about loyalty and prudence. The key factor there off to the right is independent objective oversight. And the one point that I would like to drive home here is ensure that anybody that is involved in the investment selection and monitoring process is a fiduciary, has signed on to be a fiduciary in writing, and has been identified that there clearly are no conflicts of interest. Oftentimes in a new relationship, we identify that the record keeper who also is offering their own funds may be recommending their own funds. And certainly they can't claim to be in an objective, independent and objective position, and so there are risks there. And that's one of the keys to showing that you have proper processes in place, is that everybody that is involved in that decision process is truly independent and objective. Tom is going to hit on a couple of points focused more on the risk and return characteristics.
Thanks, Bill. And I think this is a great point to stop and reiterate that, much of this overview and many of these individual points that we're speaking to will be the sole or more focused components of future webinars in this series. So we are trying to keep things as high level as possible. But that said, if you're taking notes and there's question marks at the end of your sentences, we'll hopefully address some of the finer details related to these points in future webinars as part of this series. But on the topic of risk and return characteristics in the selection and monitoring of funds, an important consideration for you as a plan sponsor, and one where we frankly see a little bit of an imbalance, is how you objectively assess a fund, whether it's in the selection process or in the ongoing oversight of an investment option. There seems to be an industry-wide over-reliance on the historical performance numbers alone. And I'm not arguing that the numbers are not a big component of an investment success, but they're not everything. And if you look at the fine print at the bottom of any investment-related correspondence that you or your plan participants receive, there's likely some iteration of the sentence, historical performance is not an indication of future performance, and that is a fact. So, we stress that investment oversight should be close to, if not more in favor of a qualitative assessment of an investment option in line with a performance-based, quantitative-focused assessment of the fund. Performance will tell you everything that a fund has done up to a certain point, but if you're missing that qualitative assessment, your ability to determine whether that fund is going to remain a viable option and is going to be able to repeat its historical performance success going forward is limited. You need to know that a fund is well resourced. You need to know the way that the strategy behind the scenes of that fund operates and the people that are running that strategy. How long have they worked together? How much outside experience do those managers have running strategies with similar type mandates? What kind of resources does that team have coming from the sponsoring fund company? And what kind of experience does the fund company itself have in supporting investments in a particular category or asset class. Once you've got more familiarity with those qualitative attributes, it's much easier to connect the dots to historical performance and pull some understanding and meaning from it. I can see, for example, that XYZ fund underperformed for a year and a half in 2010, but that's not because it's a bad fund. We understand that the strategy was misaligned with whatever might have been going on in the markets, and because we had that knowledge, we have that knowledge now going forward, and if history repeats itself, we're not terminating a manager because of some short-term underperformance, because we've got a more holistic assessment of that fund, its strategy, and its ability to outperform long-term.
Well, and just one more thing. Sorry, Tom, I'm going to take us back to this slide. Just speaking to the investment policy statement, and Tom, what he's really getting across as well, it's important that we identify what are we measuring. You know, those quantitative measures are important, and it's not just based on returns. We're also carefully measuring risk measures. We don't want it to be all about the quantitative measures, because there are times that the qualitative factors may tell us a different story, and you don't want to find yourself in a position where you have a manager that has good long-term performance and it's just as an off cycle, and suddenly you find yourself feeling forced to make a change that may not be in the interest of best interest of your participants. So that really again gets down to the guidelines should align with the goals of maximizing participant outcomes and minimizing the risk of negative outcomes. It should never trap you into short-term decisions, and that's just a key factor to keep in mind. That keep those things out of your investment policy statement that might say if something happens, we're definitely going to remove a fund. So moving forward. A lot of talk lately about investment fees, investment share classes. So certainly it's important to have a process in place to identify whether the investment fees are appropriate. And first and foremost, when you're analyzing funds, you want to do it on a net of return basis. So it's not about offering the lowest cost fund in every case. But certainly you want to recognize that as a key component and recognize the impact that those fees have on returns. In terms of assessing available share classes, that can be a little bit more of a complex situation and won't go too in depth on it. In the simplest format, you could offer the zero revenue sharing cost fund, or often known as the institutional share class, and just assess the amount of fees you need to collect to pay qualified plan expenses. At a minimum, though, you certainly want to show that you've assessed all available share classes and have a process in place to determine which fund that you've selected and why, and ensure that aligns with the expenses that need to be paid for the plan. So moving down to the second half here, the taking advantage of ERISA protections, and Tom will give a little bit more insight into the subject.
Specifically with regard to the qualified default investment alternative, or in most cases the plan's target date fund offerings, ERISA has issued some separate guidance for plan sponsors with regards to the selection and oversight of their plan's QDIA, the qualified default investment alternative. In essence, if your participants are not making an active decision to go elsewhere within the plan's investment menu, the QDIA is where their contributions are being automatically directed. That fact alone provide some indication that yes, there should be an even keener, more aware eye of what's going on with the plan's QDIA. But with target date funds really coming into prominence in that space over the last decade, there are additional considerations distinct from the rest of your investment menu that warrant attention with target date funds. And ERISA has issued some guidance to help plan sponsors with a starting point for how to look at target date funds differently. And So unlike your core asset class or category, your target date funds follow a glide path, and they're already diversified. A participant invests at age 23 in the target date fund series. At the front end of that glide path, there's already a meaningful asset allocation mix for that participant. As they continue to use the plan through their savings years, they're automatically reallocated to ensure that their risk tolerance based on their age is well aligned at any point in time with their actual asset allocation. So as a plan sponsor, your due diligence should go beyond the performance and risk-based assessment of your core investment options and more of that broad qualitative investment oversight, and should additionally focus on things like the glide path. What factors contributed to the creation of that glide path? Does the structure of that glide path make sense for my plan employee demographics? Are the underlying asset allocations appropriate? And more broadly, are the fund companies that offer these target date funds adequately resourcing them, continuing to make enhancements as more data becomes available to help drive better participant outcomes? So at a minimum, we'd encourage you to review that guidance from ERISA and ensure that at a minimum, you're following some of those basic additional steps for the selection and oversight of your QDIA. You're issuing the appropriate notices related to the QDIA, and you're documenting the additional due diligence that you're doing on that selection.
So wrapping up here, the key takeaways again, it's not exciting to say it, but process and documentation certainly are critical. And we just always want for plan fiduciaries who are overseeing ERISA plans to recognize that you are held to that standard of a prudent expert, which again is why you get assistance in different areas of plan oversight as required. One last reminder, if you do have questions, please submit those to us and we will respond to you here shortly. Know that in future webinars, we put on here some discussion points, and we'll talk more about our process for developing an investment menu and metrics that we look at, as well as not just the numbers, but also looking at qualitative factors, which really help us to identify and address potential problems in many cases before they begin to happen and you see those negative outcomes occur. And know that we will incorporate some real life examples and case studies. So today we just wanted to get that foundation down. What does ERISA say to get that out on in the open, and then let's get into the more fun part, and let's talk about exactly what would we recommend that you do in assessing your funds, and some key ideas that can help you improve outcomes for your participants. So again, thank you for joining us today. Information will be coming out shortly about our next webinar, and appreciate everybody's time. Thank you.